Well, good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to you all to our April 3rd Thursday lecture. My name is Simon Kaner. I'm the Executive Director here at the Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Cultures, and I'm delighted that this afternoon we are coming to you live from our headquarters here in the beautiful Cathedral Close in the centre of the city of Norwich. And I'm looking out of the window at the moment. We have beautiful blue skies and we have wonderful cherry blossoms on the cherry trees in the lower close, including on some of the cherry trees which we planted at the end of March. And they're now already starting to come into flower, which is absolutely lovely. So that puts us all exactly in the right mood for our spring third Thursday lecture. And it's a particular pleasure this afternoon to welcome our speaker, Dr. Koto Sadamura. Koto is one of our current Robert and Lisa Sainsbury Fellows here at the Sainsbury Institute and is spending a year with us based in Norwich. And the big project that she has been working on is what she's going to talk to us about this afternoon, is a phenomenal exhibition at the Royal Academy on Kawanabe Kyōsai. And I'm lucky enough to have one of the fabulous catalogues that Koto has authored to go alongside the exhibition at the Royal Academy of Arts down in London. And it's Kyosai, the Israel Goldman Collection. Koto has put out a number of publications relating to this. She is now the leading specialist on Kawanabe Kyōsai, no question about that, this very influential 19th century artist, and including the catalogue of the collection itself. She's also published Kyosai's Animal Circus, which was also published, a smaller volume, also published by the Royal Academy of Art down in London this year. Koto, before she came to us at the Sainsbury Institute, spent some time as a visiting fellow at the Harvard Yenching Institute while she was doing her PhD at the University of Tokyo, which she completed in 2020. Koto has published, I say, very widely, both in English and in Japanese, particularly around Kawanabe Kyōsai, and we couldn't have anybody better with us to talk to us about this fabulous exhibition. And I very much hope you all get the opportunity to go and see it while it's on in London. I've seen it a couple of times already, and I'm certainly going to be going back to see it again before it's over. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Sadamura Koto. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function, which you can see on the bottom right-hand side of your screen, hopefully, or the chat box, and we will try and get through as many of the questions as we possibly can at the end of the talk this afternoon. So sit back and enjoy the talk. I'm going to hand over to Koto right now. Koto, dozo yoroshiku onegaishimasu.
Thank you for your kind introduction, Simon. The star of today's talk is the painter Kawanabe Kyōsai, who was one of the most celebrated artists in late 19th century Japan. I will first give a brief introduction about the artist before we look into the art of spontaneous painting, which Kyōsai excelled at and was famous for. I will briefly discuss the tradition of extemporaneous art making in Japan, various settings in which this practice took place, and different styles of artworks produced impromptu, including joint works by multiple artists and drunken paintings. We will take a look at Kyōsai as a popular, masterful performer who was also famous for drinking in quantity while performing, and he sometimes got into troubles as he lost control over his behaviors. His skillful, mesmerizing performances left a strong impression on foreign visitors and residents in Japan, and there are vivid records written in English, French, and German, and I'd like to introduce some of these delightful accounts as well. I will close my presentation with some notes about the exhibition Kyosai, the Israel Goldman Collection at the Royal Academy of Arts, which I have curated. The images of Kyosai's works I'm going to use in this presentation are from the Israel Goldman Collection, unless otherwise noted. Let's begin with an anecdote published in the Japanese newspaper Yomiuri Shimbun on the 26th of April 1891, on the second anniversary of Kyosai's death. The ukiyo-e artist Utagawa Kunitoshi visited Kyosai with a roll of paper of about 152 centimeters in length and asked him to paint anything the artist felt like. At that time, Kyosai was repapering shoji, paper sliding doors, but he readily agreed, soaked the flat brush in ink, which was the brush he was using to apply glue on the wooden frames of shoji. He painted a giant face of the great Buddha, only the left half of the face, but filling almost the entire length of the paper. And just below the Buddha's large nostril hole, Kyosai added the figure of Skeroku, a popular kabuki character, striking a pose with his signature umbrella. The result was like this. In the kabuki play, Skeroku famously makes a grand appearance via the raised walkway through the audience to the stage, holding up an open umbrella. This walkway is called Hanamichi, which literally translates as flower path. The play does not mention anything about a giant Buddha, but this is Kyosai's playful visual pan on Hanamichi. The word hana, meaning flower, is also a homophone for nose, thus a path to the nose. The article mentions that another ukiyo-e artist, Toyohara Kunichika, begged Kunitoshi to trade it with a painting triptych by Watanabe Kazan, a prominent early 18th century artist, or a woodcut quadriptych by Kitagawa Utamaro, a famous late 18th century ukiyo-e artist. Kunitoshi firmly refused and declined any offer. This painting in the Israel Goldman Collection might well be the very painting that Kunitoshi treasured. This quick-witted, unexpected performance on the spot, using whatever he had at hand, portrays the artist's personality quite well. The humor, playfulness, performance full of surprises, and skillful brushwork, all of these characteristics are typical of Kyosai. Kyosai was born in Koga in 1831 and grew up in Edo, present-day Tokyo, during the last phase of the Tokugawa shogunate. This hereditary military government had lasted for nearly 230 years at that point. From an early age, Kyosai showed a talent in drawing. At the age of 6, he began his drawing lessons with Utagawa Kuniyoshi, one of the most prominent ukiyo-e artists of the time. Ukiyo-e dealt with topical and fashionable subjects, and it was understood as the art form for townspeople's class. It was only for a few years that little Kyosai studied with Kuniyoshi, but the master's influence is clear in his later works, particularly dynamic compositions and witty ideas. When Kyosai was 9, his parents moved him to a different studio to study with a Kano school teacher. Kano was the official painting school of the government, and their artists served the shogun and the ruling samurai class. His teacher adored his talent and gave him a nickname, Gaki, meaning demon of painting, which is also a homonym of kid. In 1849, when he was 18, Kyosai completed his formal Kano training in 9 years, when it normally took about 11 to 12 years. From the Kano school, he learned to paint traditional subjects such as Japanese and Chinese classics, historical figures, legends, myth, auspicious themes, and religious images. He acquired a rich repertoire of powerful brushstrokes, in particular skills in ink painting, which was Kano school's forte, as well as complex coloring methods. Also, he was trained in working on large compositions to paint on sliding doors and temple ceiling panels, for example. With the Tokugawa regime in decline, the 1850s was a difficult time for a young Kano painter to find jobs. So Kyosai made a life-changing decision to go back to the world of ukiyo-e and to design topical and satirical prints, following the footsteps of his first teacher, Kuniyoshi. Just a decade or two ago, it would have been unthinkable for an official Kano artist to produce a social satire, but by the 1850s and 60s, when the shogunate's power was in decline, social rules were much less strictly followed, and this facilitated Kyosai's career shift. It was a time of political conflicts and battles, and these events led to the Meiji Restoration of 1868. In order to restore the emperor to a position of supreme authority, anti-shogunate domains revolted against the Tokugawa government and their allies. Kyosai produced numerous satirical prints in the 1860s. They reflect people's uncertainty and anxiety about political turmoil, economic instability, and the foreign presence. He dealt with them with humor and channeled such febrile atmosphere of the time into dynamic, lively, satirical images of, for example, frog battles and monsters' parties. Once the new Meiji government was established in 1868, the society experienced unprecedented reform and transformation. After over 260 years of relative isolation, the sudden influx of Western-style culture greatly shocked many Japanese. Kyosai's comic pictures in the 1870s shows both the excitement of the new era with modern infrastructure and technologies such as telegraph and trains. They also display a certain skepticism as he satirized people who blindly followed the new trends and who felt superficially different by putting on a European appearance. It is important to remember that while making these comic pictures, Kyosai continued to produce Kano-style paintings. He established his own style by combining the two pictorial modes of Kano school paintings and of humorous pictures with contemporary references. These two modes of image making traditionally had a clear separation, and they were not to be mixed. But Kyosai brought in humor and contemporaneity to technically complex paintings, which had previously been reserved for serious subjects. By doing so, he overcame the conventional divides among pictorial schools and traditional hierarchy among them. Kyosai did this not by denying the academic style or traditional methods, but instead he embraced all the pictorial traditions in Japan and beyond, regardless of class divides or school lineages. He was an ardent student of ancient arts, while he was also an avid practitioner of sketching from life, which was strongly associated with Western methods. And his infinite curiosity was directed also to Western perspective, shading, and anatomical studies. With this eclectic style reflecting the new era, Kyosai became one of the most renowned and successful painters of his time. In 1881, Kyosai was 50 years old and was at the zenith of his fame. At the second domestic industrial exposition in Tokyo, His painting of a crow won that year's highest prize in the painting section. Kyosai was criticized by the organizers for asking 100 yen for the painting, which was some 10 times the normal price. The artist claimed that the price was not just for a painting of a crow, but it was for the many years of hard work that had enabled him to paint it. It attracted a lot of popular attention when the wealthy proprietor of the Eitaro sweet shop in Nihonbashi purchased the painting for the asking price. The company still owns the painting today. Around the same time, Kyosai met the British architect Josiah Condor. Condor came to Japan in 1877 to teach at the Imperial College of Engineering, and he became Kyosai's pupil and patron. In his picture diary, Kyosai depicts his visits in a rickshaw every Saturday to Condor's house to give a lesson. Condor took detailed notes of these lessons and later published a monograph on Kyosai's works and his painting methods in 1911. Kondo was already an accomplished watercolorist and he made fast progress with Kyosai. In about 2 years, he received the art name Kyoei with Kyosai's Kyo and A for Eikoku, meaning Britain, so British Kyosai. Kyosai met a number of foreign visitors and residents in Tokyo, but his relationship with this British friend, who was 20 years younger than him, was very special, with profound mutual respect and affection. Kyosai was his teacher, but they learned from one another. When they went on sketching trips together, Kyosai is said to have admired Kondo's ability to sketch buildings quickly and accurately in perspective. The artist died from stomach cancer in 1889 at the age of 58. He was at his home in Tokyo, surrounded by his family, close friends, and pupils, including Kondo, who was holding his master's hand as he passed away. One of the skills Kyosai was particularly known for was his speedy and masterful impromptu painting performances. Spontaneous paintings made impromptu, as we saw in the anecdote I introduced at the beginning of the talk, are called sekiga, which can be translated as painting made on the spot or at an event. Sekiga paintings sometimes show marks of the tatami, which are floor mats covered with woven soft rush straw. When you are at the exhibition, pay attention to the forehead of the giant Buddha or around the hem of the large shoki's cape to see these marks. This is because the paper was directly laid on the floor instead of on a felt rug, which was also used to paint on the spot. Sekiga are generally less formal and more fluid in style than honga, which literally translates as main or proper painting. Honga are based on preparatory drawings and often have a fine, detailed finish. They are painted over a period of time in a studio, sometimes with help from pupils. Honga can take weeks to complete, whereas sekiga might take a matter of minutes, painted spontaneously and unassisted by their studio. Honga typically use more expensive materials and pigments and usually deal with serious subjects: classical, mythical, historical, Chinese, or religious. Kano School mainly taught the Honga mode of painting. Traditionally, a clear hierarchy existed between the two modes of painting, and Honga were considered far more important than sekiga. Today, however, they are seen as equally significant aspects of Kyosai's art. Sekiga were performed in a variety of settings, at private gatherings among friends and acquaintances, in a public space such as a temple compound as a spectacle, at commercially organized public parties called Shogakai, which I will come back to shortly, or to amuse a person in authority or a foreign guest. Records from the 12th century suggest that the art of sekiga had been practiced at least since medieval times in Japan. In the collection of anecdotes and tales, Konjaku Monogatari Shu, there is an interesting story about the high-ranking monk Gisei Ajari. Someone brought a long stretch of paper to the monk and insisted that he should paint on it. Reluctantly, Gisei Ajari drew something in the middle and stopped. When the demanding guest begged him to continue, the monk painted an archer on one end, target on the other, and added a long, thin line next to the first little drawing he had made. The guest was upset, saying that the monk ruined the paper because most of its surface now had a stretch of line across it and only a few other drawings sparingly. But when looked at a distance, it actually made a picture of a flying arrow shot from the archer's bow from one end. The long, thin line was expressing the trajectory of the arrow, just like these motion lines seen in modern manga. The famous example from a period closer to Kyosai's time is Katsushika Hokusai's giant Daruma painting performance at the Nishi Betsu-in, Western Branch Temple of the Nishi Honganji Temple in Nagoya in 1817. The event had been advertised by bookshops in town, and it attracted a large crowd, and even street stalls were set up in the area. A little after noon on a sunny autumn day in the 10th month, Hokusai appeared in the temple courtyard with two pupils of his, stood on top of a massive sheet of paper of about 18 times 11 meters in size, which was laid on the ground, and using a hemp palm broom, bundles of straws and of buckwheat chaff, painted an enormous bust portrait of Daruma or Bodhidharma. It was a little before dusk when Hokusai finished coloring the robe of the Indian Zen patriarch. The giant image of Daruma was pulled up high using the pulleys for people to see it in its entirety. Many Japanese painters from medieval and early modern periods have anecdotes about their sekiga performances. These performances often had elements of wit, playfulness, and surprise, be it the size of the work or the unexpected result. With extemporaneous sekiga, not only was the finished work admired, but the entire process of creation was enjoyed as a spectacle. In the 19th century, among the most important occasions at which sekiga were painted was Shogakai, which can be translated as calligraphy and painting parties. These were commercially organized public gatherings, and they were a 19th century social phenomenon in Japan. Kyosai was a frequent and popular performer in these parties. The history of Shogakai starts in the 18th century. In the late 18th century, the term began to be used to refer to two types of gatherings. One was a temporary exhibition of calligraphy and painting. The other was an on-the-spot calligraphy and painting performance with works available for purchase. Both began as small gatherings among a circle of peers, but by the early 19th century, the second type had developed into larger scale, and members of the public started to participate. There were even agents who specialized in organizing shogakai. Originally a private cultural exchange among literati and artists, Shogakai now became highly commercial, popular events. Andrew Marks, one of the earliest scholars who studied this cultural phenomenon, pointed out the resemblance to a modern fundraising dinner. So, for example, the popular writer and ukiyo-e artist Santo Kyoden held a shogakai in 1792, and using the money he earned as a starting capital, he opened a shop that sold tobacco, pouches, and pipes, which became very successful. Some say it reminds them of a Comic-Con, a comic book convention, where authors and fans of comics gather in a large venue, and the artist would sometimes do some drawings for the fans. As the events flourished, the details changed over the decades, but a shogakai in Kyosai's time generally worked like this. 1. The host would invite painters, calligraphers, poets, and other talented individuals to perform at the party. The popularity of the guest artists had a direct impact on the potential number of attendees. Participating performers received modest compensation, but they also had to present gifts of money to the host to cover the cost of their food and drink at the venue. 2. The host would distribute flyers announcing the events. This one is for the shogakai that Kyosai hosted at the Kawachiro restaurant in Yanagibashi, Tokyo, on the 1st of May, 1873. Organizing a shogakai required so much time, energy, and care for the arrangements that after this, Kyosai never hosted one again. Shogakai would normally be held in a large restaurant. On the day, the restaurant would put out large signs outside. And attendees would pay for admission at the entrance. Once inside, they could ask their artists of choice to paint, brush a calligraphy, or inscribe a poem for them, maybe on a folding fan or in an album. In the previous era, those who commissioned the work gave the artist an extra gratuity, but in the Meiji era, artists performed for free and used the occasion generally to promote themselves and to exercise their brush on someone else's paper. In its early days in the 1790s, a popular shogakai would have gathered around 150 to 200 people. In the 1870s and 80s, the number of attendees is said to have ranged from around 200 to 1,500, and the shogakai was held somewhere in the city on almost every Sunday. This is one of the shogakai in which our artist Kyosai participated. On 6th of April 1884, the Yomiuri newspaper advertised a forthcoming event with the title Shogakai. Quote, "On the 13th next, Mr. Maejima Wakyo will host a shogakai at Nakamura-ro in Ryogoku, at which old man Shoujo Kyosai will paint a giant image of white-robed Kannon Bodhisattva on 20 large sheets of shown paper, as well as 1,000 other pictures throughout the day. In addition, his daughter, Miss Kyoshin, her actual name is Kyosai, aged 17, will also participate and paint kyoga, comic pictures, a specialty handed down to her by her father. It will surely be a bustling party." End of quote. This particular one was hosted by the newspaper writer and comic poet Maejima Wakyo. Newspaper notices like this one was new in the 1870s. The final sentence expresses excited anticipation, and Kyosai is clearly the star of the event. The promise of a giant composition and paintings at speed to be performed on the spot must have attracted quite an audience. On the day of the party, Kyosai made a sketch of the event in his picture diary. At the bottom, we see the artist arriving at the venue in his roofed rickshaw in the rain. Above, Kyosai depicts himself in the party room. He is surrounded by a crowd of spectators and painting a large image of a standing bodhisattva kannon. If the size indicated in the announcement is accurate, this painting is much larger than a surviving kannon image, also believed to have been painted at a Shogakai. Kannon seated on a dragon's head in the collection of Tokyo National Museum measures about 3.5 meters in height and almost 2 meters in width. If regular-sized shrine paper was used, which may have been the case, the size would have been closer to that of the giant Daruma painting Kondo illustrates in his 1911 monograph. It must have been quite a spectacle to see Kyosai move about briskly with his brushes, making the enormous icon appear dramatically from the white surface of the paper. The largest extant sekiga painting by Kyosai is the Shintomiza Theater Curtain, which measures 4 meters in height and 17 meters in width. This work was displayed at the British Museum 3 years ago in the manga exhibition, and Kyosai is said to have finished the composition in 4 hours after preparing himself with a couple of bottles of sake. Kyosai painted a number of Shogakai scenes, but the most complex of all is in the Israel Goldman Collection, incorporating miniature works by 54 other contemporary calligraphers and artists. Left of center, a group of people is eating, drinking, and smoking in the company of a geisha. Many geishas participated in Shogakai to meet prospective patrons and otherwise make connections. According to a contemporary source, this started to happen early in the 19th century and had become widespread by the 1820s. Behind this group, a man is pulling at the hand of another who is too drunk to walk on his own. The popular writer Hata Ginke satirized Shogakai, where more attention is paid to wine than art, and mockingly rebranded Shogakai as Shugakai, replacing Sho calligraphy and Ga painting with Shu for sake and Ga for elegance, elegant alcoholic parties. A crowd is gathering around Kyosai, who is painting next to an older artist wearing glasses. People compete for Kyosai's attention to request a painting, shouting to make themselves heard. The artist has his hand held open wide, as if to stop the demanding crowds rushing at him for more paintings. This scene makes a striking contrast with the quieter creative space of the studio, where honga were produced, or our modern experience of an art gallery, where visitors are expected to avoid disturbing others. It was during Kyosai's time that the concept and institution of the museum was first introduced to Japan, and people started to look at art in formal exhibitions. Naturally, many customs were carried over from the previous period and continued to be practiced in the 1870s and 1880s. Shogakai was among them. There was contemporary criticism of Shogakai's commercialized, self-promotional, and worldly aspects. The Confucian scholar Terakazu Seiken was particularly critical of the superficial fame and celebrity that the Shogakai culture created and promoted. Quote, "Those who can claim even the slightest refinement, who possess some modest modicum of artistic talent or virtue, immediately upon joining these associations of cultured men, are revered as sensei, august masters by the common crowds. End of quote. Kyosai too was well aware of the various materialist motives behind the Shogakai phenomenon and of the gap between the ideal and the reality of Shogakai. In his depictions of Shogakai, the artist emphasizes its money-making aspect by deliberately including the reception desk where the entry fee was paid in the foreground of the image. Even in his picture diary, Kyosai prominently features a person holding an abacus. His Shogakai images demonstrates his observant eye, recording all the merrymaking and people's worldly desires filling the room, with himself right in the middle of it. His perspective is not cold or detached. He caricatures the whole spree from within. In Shogakai or in any other gatherings, when multiple artists were in attendance, collaboration frequently took place. They would complete a picture together, or a calligrapher would inscribe a poem next to the painter's work. This is a diptych with a selection of fish and vegetables, with each object depicted by a different painter. Kyosai is at the very top of the right-hand side scroll, the scorpion fish. The position of the fish shows that he had a prominent place among the artists of his time. This is another joint work with the painter Takemoto Sekite. In the inscription on the painting, Sekite explains that his good friend Kyosai first painted the two frogs, and Sekite added the two lotuses to complete the composition. This Shogakai painting, which we have been looking at, is the most complex collaborative work I have ever seen, with 55 artists participating. After Kyosai did the overall design, miniature works within the painting were filled in by different artists over a period of time. Joint works are not unknown in the Western tradition, but certainly less common and quite different. In 17th century Antwerp, artists such as Jan Bruegel the Elder and Peter Paul Rubens made paintings together, complementing each other with their different specialities. Bruegel excelled in landscape and still life genres, and Rubens' forte was human depictions, both corporeal and emotional. Respective contributions by these artists are merged seamlessly, and the pictorial illusion of the world within the frame is intact. Japanese joint works were less concerned about creating a coherent, realistic, and complete picture. These oil paintings were not made impromptu either. As you can see in Japanese collaborations between painters and calligraphers, the importance of brush-written inscriptions within the image is also a special characteristic of the East Asian tradition. Another peculiar mode of creation commonly witnessed in Shogakai and in other occasions of sekiga making is the combination of intoxication and painting. Kyosai loved to drink, and he was often under the influence of sake when he painted. I call these works drunken paintings. With these examples, it is very obvious that the artist had consumed a considerable amount of sake. The signature is barely legible, and the brush strokes are loose and wild. Compare these images of a crow and daruma with sober paintings. You can do this at the exhibition too. This work depicts a shoujo, mythical red-haired creatures known for their fondness for sake. It's gulping down rice wine directly from a large jar. Kyosai sometimes doubled himself with their images. This painting is accompanied by a poem by the artist himself. The verse can be translated as follows. Will my body made of sake leaves bud into painting? Today once more sake after sake. Tomorrow again sake after sake. Kyosai's fondness for sake was an essential part of his persona as an artist. In East Asia, there is a long tradition of linking intoxication with artistic creation. Since the 8th century in China, influential poets, calligraphers, and painters strove for higher artistic attainments with the help of wine, inspired by the Taoist ideal of unworldliness. In Japan, numerous artists also followed this tradition, including Chinese-style poet Ono Kozan, who collaborated with Kyosai in these works. Sake certainly inspired Kyosai's creativity, but it also caused occasional misbehavior, and it once landed the artist in a serious trouble. In 1870, at a Shogakai, Kyosai was arrested and imprisoned for allegedly painting images insulting to a distinguished person, which he made impromptu while being heavily drunk. We do not know what the pictures were actually of. We don't know of any official record of the trial or sentence. The artist was too drunk to remember details of the evening. But the picture in question seems to have implied that foreigners were taking advantage of the Japanese government. This is an example of a joint work, but also of a drunken satirical sekiga by Kyosai. The Chinese poem by the calligrapher Kawanabe Kyōsai refers to the Nagasaki incident of August 1886, in which sailors from the Qin Beian fleet caused a commotion in a brothel in Nagasaki. Kyosai's depiction of the man's fart attack on the naked woman correlates the Qin sailors' outrage in the brothel. The use of fart images as a social satire goes back to the 12th century in Japan. Back to the year 1870, following the arrest, Kyosai got sick in a highly unsanitary condition in the lockup. He is said to have received 50 lashes as a punishment, but again, no official record. But even after this terrible experience, Kyosai did not stop drinking or painting satirical images at these parties, as we have just seen with the 1886 example. Spontaneous paintings does not seem to have had as much cultural significance in Europe as in East Asia. But the British painter William Turner is known for a few public performances. This portrait of Turner by Charles West Cope depicts him demonstrating his skills while acting as visitor in the Royal Academy schools, with some of the porters or sweepers looking on. Turner's famous exploit during Vanishing Day at the Royal Academy in 1832 resonate with the excitement of sekiga. If you have watched the film Mr. Turner, directed by Mike Leigh, you might remember the scene in which the painter abruptly adds a blob of red paint to his quiet seascape, Hellefoot Slice, to everyone's dismay. He later turns the red blob into a boy, but it was clearly a performance to shock the members of the RA and to challenge the red heavy painting by his rival, John Constable, opening of Waterloo Bridge, which was hung right next to his painting. Constable allegedly said, "He has been here," and fired a gun. Kyosai became known in Europe with the story of a sketching duel between him and a French painter. The French industrialist Émile Guimet, the founder of the Guimet Museum in Paris, and the French artist Félix Régamey visited Kyosai at his home in Tokyo in 1876. In his book Promenade Japonaise Tokyo Nikko, published in 1880, Guimet describes the artist being very humble and polite to the point where he appeared almost shy. But this changes when Régamey pulls out his drawing materials. Quote, Régamey has already drawn his weapons. Squatting being impossible in his trousers and gaiters, he is seated on the mat with his legs before him and his sketchbook on his knees. He asks Kyosai for permission to draw his portrait. Kyosai, bewildered, prostrates himself to signal acquiescence and thanks. He sucks air as hard as he can through his teeth to show how honored he is. But he is not the man to let things go without riposte, and spying from the corner of his eye what is taking place in Felix's sketchbook, he has surreptitiously, almost in the sleeve of his kimono, prepared his brushes, mixed his colors, and laid out a leaf of paper on the mat. Without ceasing to pose, he starts to sketch a rapid portrait of his portraitist. It goes without saying, it's a duel. And here are the two of them with fiery eye and bated breath, each attacking the other, drawing in a fury of speed, attempting to be fast and accurate. Done, cried Felix. Yoroshi, replied Kyosai. And the two portraits looked very like, that goes without saying, but above all, astonishing for the daring and the ingenuity of their making. And so I cried out in my enthusiasm, Bravo Kyosai, bravo Régamey, end of quote. Régamey, after returning to France, actively drew in front of an audience, in particular Kyosai's, in particular Japanese subjects from memory. For example, in 1884, Guimet gave a lecture on Japanese theater, and while he talked, Régamey, on a large 4-meter square canvas, illustrated objects and figures as they were mentioned by Guimet. The article published in the weekly magazine Courrier de l'Art says that, quote, with surprising agility and sureness of hand, Mr. Régamey presented to the amazed audience, one by one, a robustly built, shirtless stagehand with a hammer in hand, a dancer, a magician, and all the most characteristic types at the Japanese theater, end of quote. Régamey in the 1880s also held popular sketching evenings, soirées de dessin, a series of public lectures in which he drew in front of his audience. The painting here on the slide shows another of such public lecture with Régamey himself drawing a Japanese subject live. Many foreign visitors to Japan at the time were impressed by Japanese painters' rapidity and their lively depictions of flora and fauna. Kyosai was particularly renowned for his quick brush and outstanding draftsmanship. The German physician Irving Belz, who became Kyosai's doctor towards the end of the artist's life, had seen him paint earlier on. He wrote in his diary, quote, Tokyo, October 20, 1879. Once more with Bear at Nakamuraya. This time it was to see Japanese painters at work. Bear had invited some of the most noted artists of the day, among them Kyosai. They produced specimens of their work. In 3 hours, the three men had each of them completed somewhere near 20 big pictures, each one meter square, animals, plants, genre, landscapes, caricatures, all with fabulous speed. For the first time, I got some sort of idea how such things are done. I cannot say, however, that I have acquired a taste for this sort of art any more than I have for Japanese music. End of quote. Some European artists in Japan participated in Shogakai themselves. The British artist Charles Bergman, who was a correspondent for the Illustrated London News, frequently joined in Shogakai and other gatherings to perform. He sent the article titled "A Social Meeting of Japanese Artists" with an illustration to the Illustrated London News in 1866. Bergman writes, quote, "I, being a foreign artist at Yokohama, am always invited, but I know no rest from the moment of my appearance till it is too dark to see. I am surrounded by people who want something painted on their fans or on paper, and I generally oblige them by making caricatures of any odd-looking person in the room, or of drunken sailors, or, best of all, of English women in gigantic and impossible crinolines of gorgeous flowering colors, much to the delight of all parties." End of quote. We know from Kawasaki Tomoko's research that other foreign residents in Japan too were invited, such as the Austrian lithographer Ottoman Smolik, Mrs. Castelli, wife of the Italian consul in Yokohama, and Bergman mentions Chinese people who were invited for their superior handwriting. Although this appears to be a private gathering rather than a shogakai, in his picture diary, Kyosai depicts Josiah Condor painting impromptu on a fan at Hachimanro restaurant while waitresses gather to watch him. Some people in Europe had chances to see Japanese artists perform. Kyosai's contemporary Watanabe Seite went to Paris in 1878 at the time of the Paris World's Fair. During the couple of years of his stay, he painted in front of people in Paris, including Edgar Degas, Edmond de Goncourt, and Philippe Bürti. This is the work Seite painted impromptu for Degas. Others had to satisfy themselves with writings about these performances, and they read published accounts by their contemporaries in Japan with enthusiasm. One of such writer-artists who could respond to people's appetite was the British artist Mortimer Memphis. In 1887, he met Kyosai in Tokyo and witnessed the artist perform spontaneous paintings. This encounter had a profound impact on Memphis, who later told his teacher James Abbott McNeill Whistler that in Japan he had met another master. This is a quote from his book, Japan, A Record in Color. Taking a long burnt twig, Kyosai thought for a few minutes, looking all the while at his silk, thought out his picture, indeed before he put a single touch on his canvas. When he saw his picture complete in his mind, he began with the little burnt twig to trace a few sure lines. I never saw such facility in my life. A few swift strokes indicated the outline on the silk of two black crows. Then he took up his brush and began at once with the Indian ink, with full powerful color. And in about 7 minutes, he had completed a picture, superbly drawn and full of character, a complete impression of two black crows, very nearly life-size, resting on the branch of a tree. End of quote. One of the main themes of the current exhibition at the Royal Academy of Arts in London is Kyosai as a performer and art production and appreciation in a shared environment with the presence of an audience or of other artists. A number of sekiga, joint works, Drunken paintings are gathered in the third room, which is the last room of the exhibition. I wanted to create a space in which visitors would feel as if they were witnessing the lively presence of the artist and the moment of creation. When you see dynamic brushstrokes in these paintings by Kyosai in flesh, it feels as if the artist was just there and painted them freshly on the spot. I hope you all will get to see the show before it closes on the 19th of June. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Koto. What a wonderful, rich talk you've given us. And you've really whetted our appetites, I think, for going down to the Royal Academy to see the exhibition, which, if I'm right, is on until the 19th of June. So we have a little bit longer to go down and enjoy it. So we'll make sure we do that. If I could just remind our audience that if you have questions you would like to ask, please do pop them into the box on the bottom right-hand side of your screen that says Q&A, or just drop them into the chat box, and we'll come to those in just a couple of minutes. While I think we've got a couple of questions in there already, but while other colleagues are thinking, perhaps I could just kick us off by saying, first of all, how much I would have loved to have gone to one of Kyosai's Shogakai. They sound like a lot of fun, and what a wonderful way that would have been to really participate in a completely immersive fashion in Japanese art of the time. But I just wondered if you could say a little bit about what you think is Kyosai's legacy, Koto, in modern Japanese art. These are obviously extraordinary happenings that were taking place. Do you see traces of this, of the humor, the fun, the liveliness, the sort of the themes that he's working on? What do you think would be the lasting legacy?
There are some contemporary painters who express their respect and their admiration for Kyosai's works. And Yamaguchi Akira, for instance, he does some his own sort of picture diaries, and that's very Kyosai-esque. And then there are sort of this sort of spontaneous quality and humor of everyday life in that work. But I would say that the strongest influence of Kyosai can probably be seen in manga and tattoos. There are lots of tattoo artists who are inspired by Kyosai, and then they do small sort of Kyosai characters, for instance, of frogs or skeletons, and those are a lot of fun. And manga artists, I think they're very much inspired by Kyosai's kinetic lines, very dynamic sort of depictions of human bodies, and of course, sort of characters, like fun characters and humor in Kyosai's paintings, I think.
Wonderful, thank you. So let's have a look at the Q&A, and we've got a question from Francesca Gamino, who asks, I'm amazed by the concept of sekiga. Do you have any recommendations on how to research further sekiga, such as publications or other museum collections?
At the end of my slides, I listed some references, and I know that this is recorded and will be on YouTube. So I think you can go back and look at this list. And there are some English scholarships on sekiga that are very, very good. So please refer to that, please.
Oh, wonderful. And we'll make sure that all the details about how you can find the recorded lectures in our next month's e-bulletin, when we'll have a little report on Koto's wonderful lecture. Philip Eberel has a couple of questions for you, Koto. The first one is, did Kyosai found a school of similar artists that followed his style?
So Kyosai had a lot of pupils, but not many of them sort of became well known. Some of them are Kyosai's children, And Kyosai, who appeared in one of the newspaper articles that I quoted, she became a good painter herself, and she taught at a school of painting school for women in Japan afterwards. And then, so Kyosai's children, they did a similar sort of style, like they succeeded Kyosai's style and then mixed humor and serious painting subjects. Other than that, for instance, Kobayashi Eitaku, who was junior to Kyosai, but they were good friends. He also mixed the Kano training and also ukiyo-e style, so a lot of sort of bijinga, so beauty images, and some humorous images, but he was, I think, a little more serious, probably, and there aren't that many humorous paintings by Eitaku. So there aren't that many people who exactly followed what Kyosai did. I think it has to do with the fact that even during his lifetime, Kyosai was quite criticized for mixing serious and funny. And these works were criticized for being vulgar and too much of a popular taste. And that tendency becomes the major sort of mainstream idea about art, that like art has to be serious and spiritual and philosophical. So the sort of the art that Kyosai was making, it became quickly out of fashion in Japan, and it's very recent that Kyosai is sort of back in the spotlight of Japanese art history.
Oh, wonderful, thank you. And Philip Ebrell's second question, Koto, is: did kamishibai influence sekiga?
Oh, I don't really know, but I think kamishibai is probably much later. Sekiga started in medieval periods, like in the 12th, as we saw in the 12th century tale. Kamishibai is probably a modern development, but I don't know much about that.
Thank you. We have another question from Václav Cheska. Excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that, but Václav asks, what happened to his studio after his death? Has it been preserved?
So his children, like I said, they succeeded his style and then continued sort of the Kyosai style paintings. But after they died, I don't think it continued. The Kawanabe family continues until today, and the great-granddaughter of Kyosai runs the Kawanabe Kyōsai Memorial Museum, and the family has great heritage of preparatory drawings, and they also have wonderful paintings and other works, prints and illustrated books. But what I heard from Kawanabe sensei is that she was told not to practice painting by her grandmother, so Kyosai's daughter, somehow. So the lineage didn't continue, it seems, artistically at least.
We have another question. I think we've already dealt with this one. Henrik Kurtz is asking if you can share your list of publications in English language on Kyosai, but we'll make sure that all goes out with the materials, as I say, with the report from the talk. So if any of you are listening and you don't get our monthly e-bulletin, just drop us an email and we'll be very pleased to add you to the list, and then you get a monthly note from the Sainsbury Institute. And we always include a short report on the third Thursday lecture of the previous month. And this time we'll make sure there's plenty of information about where else you can find information about this wonderful artist. Now, from our very own Nicole Coolidge-Roumaniere, who says, "A brilliant talk, thank you very much. Can you explain a bit more about Kyosai's reception in Japanese art historical canon? Has it shifted with the work you and others are doing?"
Has it shifted?
I think she's saying, has the Japanese art historical canon, so the sort of what is widely regarded as the sort of the established range of Japanese art materials that will be treated by art historians, has the work that you and your colleagues have been doing shifted that canon in Kyosai's favor, for example?
I hope my study and will have an impact somehow. But of course, Kyosai has been studied by other scholars before me, and they've made a tremendous effort to bring him back to the Japanese art history. Tsuji Sensei definitely, and yes, many others. But Kyosai had been really underestimated in the Japanese art history, for a very long time, until 1990s. That's when sort of Kyosai's name started to appear in the Japanese art history writings. And in terms of popular appreciation, it's really in the 2010s that Kyosai became really popular, and then he's now one of the most popular artists of in the Japanese art history. But since the 1990s, I think people are looking at people are appreciating more about things that are sort of outside the canon. For instance, Kinoshita Naoyuki Sensei, he looks at artworks that do not fit in the sort of traditional idea of art, and a lot of Japanese arts were like that, and then they didn't really fit in the traditional canon of sort of serious contemplative artworks that fit in museum gallery space. There are things that are massive, like the one we saw with Kyosai's theater curtain, or things that are sort of made impromptu, like sekiga. These things had not been discussed in Japanese art history very much. But I think works by Kinoshita Sensei and another artist, Tsuji Sensei, it really they are making difference in the study of Japanese art.
I see we've got an amazing range of friends and colleagues in the audience this afternoon, cut off from all parts of the world, I think from Japan and from the States, as well as here in the UK. And I think we're particularly pleased, of course, to have Israel Goldman with us this afternoon. So very good afternoon to you, Izzy, and many congratulations again on this fabulous exhibition and the catalogues and the publications and everything that's happening around it. I wonder, Koto, could you tell us, you just said that Kyosai is now incredibly popular. Can you tell us something of the significance of the Israel Goldman Collection in terms of other collections of Kyosai elsewhere in other parts of the world?
So Israel Goldman Collection, which is now shown at the RA Collection, Royal Academy, what's on display is really a tiny part of his collection. This is the richest collection of Kyosai's works in the world, and it's very comprehensive. And Izzy has been interested in all aspects of Kyosai, so he's been trying to collect not only really wonderful animal images that he adore, and also impromptu paintings of like wonderful brushstrokes, but also serious paintings, religious paintings, and also prints and illustrated books. Izzy is a leading art dealer of Japanese prints and paintings, and he has such a wonderful eye and knowledge of Japanese prints. So his print collection is definitely the highest quality, and there are many rare impressions as well. And it is the collection is actually at the collection is actually on long-term loan at the British Museum. It is available for public study as well, which is really wonderful. And yes, it includes, for instance, one of the things that I love about Izzy's collection is that it's still ongoing. So Izzy is still collecting. So I get to share the moment of, I get to enjoy the moment of discovery of new works, which still happens with Kyosai, which is incredible. So it's a wonderful collection.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. And perhaps we could, and Nicole's asked a question, that's what I was thinking about this as well. And perhaps you could talk a little bit about, if you dare, talk a little bit about Izzy Goldman too. But can you tell us, Koto, what you've been working on Kawanabe Kyōsai for a long time, your PhDs on Kawanabe Kyōsai. What really got you started on this study? What attracted you to Kyōsai in the first place?
I'm a big fan of Kyosai. When I don't remember when I first saw his works, but I've always sort of liked his paintings and his images of animals in particular. I love animals, and he really animates all the living creatures, from big animals to tiny insects. That I really love, and I love his humor, and also that his paintings are done from the perspective of common people who he felt close to, and he was one of them. And he often sympathizes with underdog in society. I guess he felt himself as one too. So his images are very warm and humorous, and it's never cold or detached, like I mentioned in the talk. But when I decided to study him as a scholarly, it actually happened in France. I was there doing a gap year. I wasn't really doing anything academic there, but I felt a little bad for not doing anything academic for 1 year. So I went to the library in Lyon and decided to read a book in French, like just complete one book in one summer. So I decided to read Émile Guimet's Promenade Japonaise. And if you had studied Kyosai a little bit, you would have known that Guimet had met Kyosai, but I didn't know anything about that. I was ignorant. I didn't know anything about it, and then it was a complete surprise. And then I encountered the passage that I read out loud in this lecture. I was reading that in the library, and then I was like, "Oh my! This is so much fun, and it's so lively." And I was incredibly attracted to the artist, and I was always interested in the interactions between Japan and other countries, artistic interactions between Japan and other countries. So that's how I got started.
Wonderful, Koto. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for answering all of our questions on top of a really wonderful and illuminating talk. And once again, on behalf of all of us, I think to you and to Israel Goldman and to everybody at the Royal Academy, many, many congratulations. And thank you so much for bringing this amazing exhibition to London for us. I'm sure that some of our colleagues will want to know if there are plans to travel the exhibition, to send it to other parts. So that's something we could look forward to in the future. And I know that in the meantime, we can listen into BBC Radio 3, I believe, on the 3rd of May, if I've got that right, at 10 o'clock, when you'll be in conversation with Chris Harding about the exhibition as well. So that's something to be looking forward to very much. I'm afraid we're pretty much out of time. All I need to do is to let you know that next month we have Dr. Mary Redfern from the Chester Beatty in Dublin will be speaking to us on exemplary women, poets and prints, untangling a Surimono series by Yashima Gakute, and that is on Thursday, the 19th of May. So we look forward to seeing as many of you as possible again online for that. I want to invite all of you in the Zoomosphere to join with me in a virtual round of applause for Koto for a wonderful talk. Thank you so much once again. And I've learned something this afternoon about the Taoist view of the world and how imbibing sake can bring on that sense of unworldliness. As you know, normally, or prehistoric times, we used to be able to enjoy a glass of something with all of our audience. We can't do that with everybody this evening, but I am pleased to be able to let you know we're going to take Koto and a few friends out for a couple of glasses of something and something to eat. So we'll see what state of unworldliness we arrive at by the end of the evening. So thank you very much indeed, Koto. Thank you to all of you for listening. Thank you to our sponsors, the Gatsby Charitable Foundation, the Great Britain Sasakawa Foundation, and Yakult for helping us bring these lectures to you. And we look forward to seeing you again next month. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you.